open market operations are either sales or purchases of treasury securities, treasury bonds, or treasury bills. Suppose the Fed wants to put money into the system, okay? Then what they do is they buy treasury securities in New York. Okay, New York is kind of the center of the bond market in the U.S. Okay, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York actually does all the open market operations because they're in New York and that's where the market is. Okay, I'm sorry, they buy $10 billion worth of treasury bonds that are out there. Okay, treasury market is very broad. There are transactions every day. There are billions and billions of transactions every day. So the Treasury just buys, say, $10 billion worth of bonds. Okay? Okay. So what happens is, Jordan sells a savings bond. Okay? She doesn't know who the buyer is. Okay? The savings bond goes to the Federal Reserve, and Jordan gets a check. Okay? What do you do with that check, probably? You put it in the bank. Okay? Suddenly, Jordan's bank just now got a $10 billion deposit, assuming that it was a big enough treasury bond. Okay? Now, first question, where did the Fed get the money for that $10 billion purchase? They paid for Jordan's bond, right? So they needed $10 billion. So where did they get it? They created it out of thin air. Okay. Who keeps the books in the banking system? The Fed. So they just said, let there be $10 billion more, and we'll just put it in there. We'll just make a computer entry. Okay. The money, in the form of a check, goes to Jordan. She deposits it in her bank, and all of a sudden, the reserves of Jordan's bank, and in fact the reserves of the entire banking system, are now $10 billion bigger. Okay? Now, what do banks do when they get deposits? They lend them out. Okay? And then those loans get deposited and spent. And those banks lend out some. And so when the dust settles, the increase in the money supply is several times as large as the increase in bank reserves. But the thing to understand is it all started when the Fed said, let there be $10 billion more. We're just going to create it out of thin air. And who's going to question us? I mean, think about it. You're a bank. You keep your money. You keep the majority of your reserves in Richmond. Okay? So if Richmond says you've got $10 billion more, well then, by golly, you do. Okay? Remember a long time ago how we said money is a confidence game. Money, it has value because we think it has value. Okay? Some of you are looking skeptical or outraged or scared or something. Do you have a question here? It works the same way in reverse. If the Fed decides there's too much money in circulation, then they sell one of their securities that they purchased some previous time. Okay? So Sarah buys a $5 billion treasury security. How do you pay for that? With a check. Yeah. You write a check from your account. When the account clears, what happens is bank reserves have just shrunk by $5 billion. And when the Fed sees that, what do they do with that $5 billion? They throw it away. It's gone. It just doesn't matter anymore. It's out. Okay? The way to understand this is the Fed is outside the banking system. It operates on the banking system, but it's not part of the banking system. In the same way that the Fed is not part of the government except legally. They're outside the government. So that's money supply. Money supply, whether it's M1 or M2, is controlled, heavily influenced, if not controlled, by the Federal Reserve. Okay? So the Fed decides how much money they want out there, and they make it happen, more or less. Okay, now, other side of the